Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to bring us all back, and I feel that we have to do this before we move any further. I want to bring us back to day, I think it was day 10 of the previous election in 2015, where the Prime Minister, or then member from Papineau, said in his campaign promise to Canadians was he was going to do things differently. He said he represented real change, and he said that one of the things that he was going to do is he was going to let the debate reign, Mr. Speaker, and he was not going to use parliamentary tricks such as time allocation to pass legislation. Mr. Speaker, I would hazard to guess we're in the 50s now that this government has actually used time allocation to pass legislation. I'll also offer this, Mr. Speaker. This is an important piece of legislation. They've got the support from our caucus on this side of the House and the opposition on this side of the House. I will offer this, and I feel it's necessary to say this at all times when they do these types of tricks. This House does not belong to them. It does not belong to you, Mr. Speaker. It does not belong to me. It belongs to the electors. Those electors that elected the 338 members of Parliament to be the voice of those electors here in this House. Now, for those that are listening in, what has happened now on this piece of legislation is that the government has basically said, enough debate, this is going to committee. In committees, we do good work, but it is essentially like speed dating for the most part. So the consultation that happened, there will be witnesses from all over Canada that will come in to speak to this. I do not know how many meetings there will be on this, but I can speak to the experience that I have on our Fisheries Committee, that sometimes we have 3 guests, 4 guests, maybe 3 or 4 days that we'll study this, but each witness gets 7 to 10 minutes to give their thoughts and their views on such legislation. Mr. Speaker, only through fulsome debate can we move legislation as important as this. And now, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to bring this to the personal side of it. I've mentioned this in this House a number of times. My wife and my children are First Nations. They do not know their language. They are not familiar with their culture. This is an important piece of legislation. It deserves the ability to have any member of Parliament that may not be able to have a constituent or a First Nation come before the committee to be able to bring that story and their voices here to this floor. Mr. Speaker, it's shameful that again, that we are seeing time allocation. Now, the beauty thing about this House is that sounds travel. And on one of the earlier questions, one of the members across the way had shouted out, perhaps didn't think that we would hear it on this side. But the reason why this is being pushed through so quickly, and it was mentioned on the other side, is because of an election that's coming this way. Mr. Speaker, we have to do whatever we can to make sure that the voices of Canadians are heard, of Indigenous peoples are heard, the meaning and the importance of Indigenous languages. C-91 is another one of those bills that, again, we're seeing they place such great importance, they put their hand on their chest, yet they ram it through with little to no consultation. The Honourable Minister likes to say that they've done 1.5 years of consultation. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you in our neck of the woods, Cariboo, Prince George, not many of our First Nations have been consulted on this, and they'd like to have their say. Mr. Speaker, through you, I would urge our honourable colleague, the Minister, to rethink this. And I want to ask through you, why does he feel the need to once again break a campaign promise and force allocation or time allocation on this piece of legislation?
The Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable colleague started his comment by us saying that we would do things differently. That's exactly what we did. We've been consulting for almost 2 years, Mr. Speaker, with the Inuit, with the Métis, with the First Nations, with modern treaty lands, with the self-governed nations. We've been consulting across the country, Mr. Speaker. We're discussing this here. We're going to go to committee where we can discuss and evaluate the possibility of amendments, Mr. Speaker. But as we speak, languages are being lost from across the country. And my colleague, said it very eloquently. And he's right. We're right. We have to do something. This is extremely important, what we're doing here, Mr. Speaker. And if my colleague doesn't believe me, maybe he'll believe National Chief Perry Bellegarde, who says that it's a landmark legislation. National Chief says that now there is hope. This is good for all Canadians. President Clem Chartier, Métis well-known and respected leader, says that this is reconciliation in action. He salutes the Prime Minister for acting on his priority. Clara Morin-Dahl, the President Métis Nation of BC, actually from BC, Mr. Speaker, said this bill marks a giant first step. It's an historic day for our nations. This comes from very respected people. It's them saying it, not me. Of course, I agree with them, Mr. Speaker, but the fundamental thing about this is that we're starting with something strong. We're starting with something extremely strong. We're advancing the objective of the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We're responding to 3 calls of action, 13, 14, 15. We will provide stable and long-term funding. We're recognizing for the first time, Mr. Speaker, that languages' rights are rights based on Section 35 of our own Constitution, Mr. Speaker. This is huge. Is it an answer to everything? No. Can we do more? Of course, and we'll always try to do more. But this is fundamental. We're starting on a very solid basis, Mr. Speaker, and we'll do it for all Indigenous people in our country.
Absolutely. Questions and comments?